I'm Anne Thompson. I'm a visual artist and a writer, and I also teach a visual arts course for the School of Journalism here. And I'm very excited to be the moderator of this panel, and that there is a panel about the public art for True/False, because I think this is the first time there's been a panel about the public art. So it's really terrific. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to see. I've got to practice turning my head. We're going to go down the line of our artists. I'm going to introduce them. We'll see some images of their work, so we all have seen the work, and then we'll open this up to discussion with questions from me and from the audience. I don't want to wait to the end to have a Q&A. Once we've looked at everyone's work, if people have questions, just step up to the mic, and we'll answer the questions. So, sitting next to me is Leland Drexler-Russell, and he is from St. Louis. Mm-hmm. Yes. Can you just say a few words about your work that we're seeing up here?
Yeah, the one on the left is a collaborative Burning Man project that we did.
Is this with Spore or?
No, this is with a separate group out of Arcata that kind of changes names every year.
But collaboration.
On the project, yeah. And they kind of approached me looking for someone to design this Mayan temple that the artist Max Jones wanted to create. And I have a background in architecture, so I was like, yeah, that sounds like an amazing experience. So this is built all in California in modular pieces, and it's built in such a way that it all fits on a box truck and then goes up really quickly. It's built in the desert with minimal power tools, so everything has to be kind of pre-built. You know, we had 3 days to make that out of a bunch of piles of wood. And the piece to the right is from Artica, which is a giant arts festival out in St. Louis, Missouri, in kind of like an abandoned area of the riverfront. The whole idea behind that festival is to bring life to this abandoned area through art once a year. And this is a dome structure from the outside. It's just a black plastic dome. And when you walk inside, it's like this very light structure inside. That mirror is actually positioned in the center of it, and there's a slit in the dome that follows the sun from 11 o'clock in the morning to sunset. So throughout the day, the sun hits a different part inside the dome, and then you can kind of use that mirror to play with the light on all these different artifacts inside of it.
Is this a photograph of that space?
Yeah, that's a photograph.
Yeah. Okay. Is Taylor Ross, come on up. So this is Taylor Ross. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to go to the Missouri Theater to see the interactive piece with the fox on top of it, but that's, yes, very, very cool. That's Taylor's piece. And I think,
I feel like I'm at the hairdresser.
I know, it's weird, right? Didn't you just do a performance with the fox?
Yes.
I think you're just, so we'll save that and talk about that in a minute. Could you talk a little bit about the images that are on the screen behind you, if you can move your head with your mic, and just tell us a little bit about your work as the audience.
That's funny. There's not actually one of the fox. Cool.
Right.
We'll talk about see it.
We'll talk about the fox in a minute.
Yeah. So on your right, you can see a detail of some of the gears that are part of this project. It's a mechanical galloping fox, and it's just based on this is a piece of the sound box. It's an old piano, a section of an old upright piano that was salvaged from a barn buried in snow a couple years ago, and it's hooked up to these gears so that when the gears run via a crankshaft, there's little dowels that come out, and they're gridded to play a song. And some of the inspiration for that was just old music boxes and the fascination with being able to visualize music, visualize rhythm and melody, like relatively simple mathematical ratios that you can't really see when you're playing music, but they are relevant, and so I thought it would be fun to try and do that.
Cool.
And also just the idea of taking something that's very consistent, that's mechanical, that's a machine, and the ability for that motion, that spinning gear, to turn into something that appears to be much more natural in its movements, being able to create like oblong circular movements that that build emotion that is something that we recognize as a running animal, like the correct movements of an animal.
And this piece is in line with other work you've done, sort of that operates at the intersection of sort of sound and sculpture and performance, right?
Yeah, this is actually the first piece that I've really gotten to make a big project out of, and it came out of a project that I'm still working on and probably will be working on for a long time, which is a pedal-powered wooden-geared drum machine. And I just like that. I heard as I was running over here from the performance, I heard you talking about building in the desert and like with just with what you had and with not a lot of power tools, or I think that's what you said. And yeah, part of my relationship to projects like this and is that it is out of wood. A lot of this wood is local wood, almost all of it. Wood from Iowa, which is the place where I grew up, which is where I built the base of the project, and then wood from Columbia, from this really sweet man named Peter, who's a chemistry professor and really talented woodworker, and he built the dulcimer part of the project. And that's all out of local sycamore and elm, and relating, maybe it sounds corny, but it's how I feel, relating to the materials, understanding where they come from, understanding that sound moves through a material and that material is relevant to the flavor of the sound. And I think that we've lost some of that in our relationship to electric and electronic music, which I love. And it is essentially an imitation of a type of vibration, which is cool. But I also like the idea of having the essence of something. The particles are being pushed through waves through a material that has different density and different mass, and so the boundary between those two materials, the air and that material, is really where you get the flavor of the sound, which is why it's exciting that you're hearing Columbia.
Okay. We'll talk more about the fox and the music in a second. That's great. So this is Akiko Stehrenberger. Am I saying that right? Yes. So Akiko designed the poster for True False, which I hope everyone has seen. It's really terrific. And I think we'll have, do we have an image of more? Okay, here we go. So do you want to talk, you're from Los Angeles?
I'm from Los Angeles. And I apologize in advance for my overuse of the word dude. Can't fight it. I'm a poster artist. I am not just an illustrator. I come up with my concepts, do all the type layout. So it's kind of from beginning to end. My hands and my brain are involved. I guess none of these are up there, but I guess what people know the most of is my Funny Games poster, which is a digital illustration of Naomi Watts crying. I've been doing movie posters for 10 years now. Before that, I was an editorial illustrator. So it's been fun and interesting. Every project's so different from the next, so I'm constantly having to think and come up with creative ways of trying to make a poster that isn't a giant Will Smith head exploding over New York City.
Which is awesome.
Which is awesome.
Which would be
I'm
awesome.
not, talking smack about it, but
in terms of the Naomi Watts, just in case people don't know, Akiko's posters are for, editions of them are for sale at Uprise or through PS Gallery, but they're on display in the bakery, including the Naomi Watts one, which is really fantastic. And this limited edition is digitally printed on very high quality textured paper. They're really nice. So you can see an exhibit of Akiko's work there. So, and finally, Jarred Alterman made the bumpers, which, in case you don't know, is the film that gets played to debut, and the documentary.
It's a silly name, though. I was talking to Gary.
It's not a trailer. Bumper.
It's a weird name, bumper.
Yeah.
But I like to call them like little vignettes. We'll call them. Does that work? Portraits?
Yeah, sure. Well, that vignette does work because every year the festival does ask someone to create a series of these bumpers or vignettes, as they were, that set the tone for the festival. And there's always more than one, and they're always really great to see. So I think we'll see one now, yeah, and then Jarred can talk
Ladies
about
and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it is my privilege to bring to you Her Majesty, Her Grace, Sophie Fraze.
And over here we have the main magician, Arrow Fraze. A lot of times the assistant, it's their job to make sure that the trick gets back on track and that it's going to end up right. I like working with my dad because he knows how we'll work best together. Our house has a bunch of oddities, so
That's a good way of putting it.
I just kind of learned, okay, you know, I'm not gonna look at that creepy clown picture. I'm just gonna look past that. I actually never thought about learning how to do the levitation, but that might be something I work for.
You're light enough.
You know what? I think it'd be pretty cool to have people think I really was magic. Your number is 5.
Thank you. If I ever have a daughter, I want her to be just like that.
She's a cool
I
kid.
fell in love with her. Sorry, you were going to ask me a question.
Oh, no, I was just going to, I want to start off our conversation with Jarred because the job of everyone here was to somehow interpret or work with the festival's theme of magic realism. So when you set out to kind of set this really important tone with the bumpers, vignettes, with the theme of magic, what were you thinking about and how were you thinking about interpreting that? In terms of the festival.
Well, like a magic trick, how we actually started was light years from how we actually finished. This campaign started with an actual escape artist theme. David called me one day because we have this mutual appreciation for Houdini. I don't know, maybe secular Jews are obsessed with Houdini. I don't know what it is. As a boy, like that was our superhero. God, I sound like it's like turn of the century or something. And we had this escape artist that I'm not allowed to tell you his name, but he's local. And about 5 days before production...
I didn't know there was a local escape artist.
There's a very famous local escape artist that he will not be named here today.
Okay.
So we were planning this, and the idea was it was supposed to be kind of 4 of the greatest Houdini escapes that this one guy could perform. And each of them would get bigger as you know, from Thursday to Sunday. Sunday would be like the biggest Houdini escape, and possibly we're going to stage it live at the Missouri Theater. About 5 days before production, I get a text message, and I was in Amsterdam, from David saying, so our guy decided to bail, and we're gonna have to scrap that whole campaign.
He escaped.
And I'm like, you know, riding a bike, it's Amsterdam, and I'm like, okay, panic, no problem. Let's just revisit this in a couple months. We'll be behind schedule, and we'll rethink this campaign. We'll find something else. And he's like, nope, I think I have a trick up my sleeve. Just give me 48 hours. And sure enough, a couple days later, David was able to wrangle local magicians. And everyone you see in these spots, right now, what you were just looking at is Arrow and Sophie Fraze. And Arrow runs a magic shop called, God, I texted him earlier. It's around the corner from here. Gotcha. Okay, thank you. And from Arrow, Arrow was able to put us in touch with Steve Ferris, who was, if everyone saw the bumper from yesterday that Mr. Gary Oxenhandler was in. Yes, fantastic. It kind of crosscuts between Gary and Steve, you know, Gary talking about misdirection and Steve kind of performing misdirection. And so from there, this what seemed like a disaster at first because of our whole Houdini campaign went to crap. We were able to wrangle 4 local magicians. And what I love about that is being, you know, the true-false philosophy is this is such a local spirit, and it's, you know, you hear it every day. I mean, you were just talking about, you know, the idea of wood being, you know, and how integral that is to the work you do. It was so much more rewarding to work with local people because, you know, last night, the 1,200 seater in the Missouri Theater, there he is, Mr. Gary Oxenhandler up on the screen, and you're not going to have that impact anywhere else. So, long story short, from there, the idea was, because we couldn't prepare too much, we were going to really ground that into the campaign into a real documentary situation. I'm a filmmaker, I'm also a commercial director, and what I love about my work is having conversations with people and really getting to know them. And this was not scripted. We knew a little bit about, when Gary walked in the room, we knew a little bit about misdirection and kind of where some of the ideas that he brought to the table, and that's all that was. This was a...
Can I ask, I don't know if everyone, well, we haven't seen all the bumpers yet because they come out different, but each one has a theme, and yesterday's was misdirection, today's
collaboration.
Collaboration, and then skill, and then
wonder and skill.
Wonder and skill. So it's misdirection, collaboration, wonder, and skill.
And
did you have those terms before you met the musicians, or did they help?
Well, the idea was if we were going to interview 4 people, and we would each talk about 4 themes that can best describe a magic trick, but could also parallel what it takes to make a documentary. So if I were to take away magic and substitute it for documentary, the idea behind that is in misdirection, when you watch a film, we take it for granted that what you're seeing on the screen is just reality. But in actuality, there is a lot of manipulation that took place from the filmmaker to get all of those those sound bites and the way the camera kind of lies. So in that idea of misdirection, collaboration is you can't do it alone. As a documentary filmmaker, we're only stronger because we assemble a great crew to work with. Wonder is the film's idea of suspension of disbelief, and skill is skill. And so the idea of magic and documentary filmmaking kind of go hand in hand, and we thought each day would kind of illustrate those points.
That leads me nicely into Akiko, because I wanted to ask you, and do we have the poster?
It's right there.
Okay.
Right next
this
to you.
here. Okay,
Yeah.
super. So the poster sort of reflects these ideas of magic and the magic trick and the sleight of hand, but the other dimension to this theme is realism, and I wondered how you as a designer brought those 2 ideas to bear when you were thinking about how to visually represent the festival and the poster.
I think given the first theme of magic, I also collaborated with Eric Buckham, who did the posters last year and the year before. So when we first got the theme of magic from Paul and David, our brains kind of went as far as it could go.
What? What was the craziest idea you came up with?
We came up with this kind of, I guess the easiest way to kind of relate it to is an avatar where they have these floating cities. It's just like pieces of earth floating in the universe. Like we kind of took this, the orange tree, and put it on this floating universe, and we really made it absolutely surreal and just out there. And then I think after we presented it to David and Paul, they were like, okay, yeah, that's great. Can we reel you back in kind of closer to the more traditional ideas of magic? And then that's when we kind of came up with common themes without being too cliched, like the rabbit, So they also provided us with this beautiful magic book of old posters from the past. So it was just pulling themes from what we saw were rather consistent without being too obvious. So that's kind of brought us back down to earth to bring you the poster that you see now.
Cool. Thinking about the rabbit and that animals and the idea of magic. Taylor, when I met you last night, you were talking about I asked you about why a fox. Because I don't know if anyone's seen this, it looks like a giant child's toy, and you crank it, and this wooden fox on top moves, and then there's the percussion, sort of player piano, mallets and strings underneath that play a song. So why is the fox the animal on top of the toy?
Since going to school and since being in college a long time ago, when I was in college, I think I was taught to overthink everything that I was doing, and this project was a fun opportunity to go follow my initial desire of what I would want to build, and I remembered reading an interview of a musician where they were asked, like, what do you write about, or how do you decide what you write about, and what makes a good song? And their response was, I write what I know, and that's how I write the best songs. And I remember that really, I remember that because I thought a lot about how actually what I also play music a lot of the time, and a lot of what I wrote about were these worlds or these situations or characters that could exist or that I imagined to possibly be true. And it wasn't directly what I knew, it was what I could know or what I hoped I might know. And so for this project, the fox is actually something that I do know. And it was fun to go down that avenue of just sort of pulling from old stories, stories that have like mystical significance for me in my own life, and just letting that kind of see if I could let that flow out into the creature. So I was in, do you want me to tell this story?
Sure, why not?
I was in New Mexico very late at night one time, driving through the desert in the summer, and it was a full moon, and the night was dark, but there was a little bit of navy blue tinge to it, and there was one triangular mountain in the distance, but not too far away, like reachable, a mile maybe. And there was a deer, what I thought was a deer in the side, almost in the road. And it was 2 in the morning. I thought I was seeing like neon lights in the distance, but then we would drive through them and they weren't real. I was completely with it, just tired. And we pulled over, and I went to pull the deer off the side of the road, and I was looking at its face, and it's like its eyes were really bulgy, like much more bulgy than the deer that I know from Iowa, and it had this really long snout and like a white stripe, and I was looking at it and kind of like petting it, thinking like, you're so beautiful, deer in New Mexico are so different. And then I saw something move in the corner of my eye, and it was a fox, like a really ragged, wild fox that was sort of looking at what we were doing. And my first instinct was just to start running after it. Like I jumped over this barbed wire fence and started running after it and was just like, let's play, Mr. Fox. And so we did, actually. We ran around in circles. Like we like ran like this in circles, and kind of like closer and closer and closer, until at one point, like I was like sitting on the ground, and the fox was right here, and we were just staring at each other. And as it was meant to be, my friend couldn't see me anymore and was worried, so she called out my name right in the moment where the fox was about to either kiss me or eat me. And so then I thought, okay, this has been good enough. I will go back to the car. And that's where the fox came from for me. And I really enjoyed the settling into the idea that when you're asked to build something, it doesn't have to be something new into the future, but that your past can be pulled on, and those stories can come and have a life. Also with the music too, the music kind of like came from the past. We did a performance of music that was written for the piece, and so drawing from the past and those moments that are magical, I guess, was a hope that maybe some of that would transfer. Yeah.
Thanks for telling the fox story.
Yeah.
In terms of what Taylor was talking about, like working with the natural environment or kind of the surroundings, the things that you have, you do this, as a matter of course, a lot in your practice. How, the Burning Man and in St. Louis, how did you approach the situation here with the festival? Or what did you initially propose the pods, or did it change at all?
Yeah, I actually initially proposed the pods. My previous work is a lot more environmentally based than this is. That's coming from it. I went to school for green design, green architecture, so it's very like site-based, sun-based. You think of like all the elements that are happening and engaging with the site. And this one, I was kind of wanting to get away with that and try something new, try something a little bit out of my comfort range. And I was thinking about electronics, and I was also reading a lot of science fiction, Ender's Game at the time, so I was like thinking of like creating these like alien species that can like kind of invade a cityscape. And I was already thinking about that project. It was right after Artico. I was thinking like what the next thing would be, and then I came across the magical realities for True False, and I was like, wow, that is really, really coincidental. It worked well together because it was kind of like the idea behind the piece was creating something a little bit enchanted in the everyday. Like so, you walk through your everyday scene, and then all of a sudden something like a little bit out there, a little bit more enchanted, kind of like pops into your existence. So as far as working in the environment, it was really kind of just creating something unusual in a very familiar space. You know, lots of people walk downtown in the picture house or walk down by the alley, and it's something a little bit different there that like kind of changes the environment just a little bit.
So the magic coming into the everyday.
Yeah, and that's more where I thought about it, is making everyday magical, and kind of like how do you create that, as opposed to, I guess like the more magical reality of like the reality of magic kind of thing.
Right, which is more of where, because I was going to get back to Jarred and ask, sort of when you were working with the magicians, how, or just sort of thinking about the films, how did you bring in the idea of the reality? Because you see the magic, and then the reality is, how are you kind of representing that tension? Because both things are going on. And it's a great metaphor for what, I mean, you were saying about documentary film in general, those two things happening.
Well, you know, I think all these ideas were still born out of these conversations. And
with the individual magicians?
Yeah. So I didn't really, we had no idea, with Gary, you know, he walked in the room, we discussed a little bit about misdirection, but I had no idea where the conversation was going to go. And that was with the same as my other, you know, interviewees. There were other themes that came out of all these conversations, but at the end, you know, we decided, you know, these were the 4 strongest themes. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Well.
And we didn't want to, you know, I just want to, and also want to just talk about Akiko, right?
Akiko.
Hi.
And just if anyone else has a question, seriously, we don't have to wait to the end for Q&A. If people have a question while these guys are talking, just step up to the mic and.
Well, it was, you know, early on as well, when David called me, he told me about this book, and this book that you talked about, the magic book, is this huge, dense 500-page magic book. So, and I went to Strand Bookstore, and I'm like schlepping around this massive book, and for about a month, you know, I was digging through it, trying to find, you know, what kind of magic were we after? Because we didn't want this to be the rabbit out of the hat. We didn't want this to be silly. You know, when you look at the history of magic, there is definitely some silly kind of periods.
It's corny a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to the True False webpage, the first thing they say is the last thing we wanted people to think about was Job in Arrested Development. Because when you bring up magic in a documentary film festival, I mean, it's kind of silly. It was important to kind of find that, you know, we were talking about this earlier, like where magic and realism play in, it's not so much about magic or realism, but it is this kind of tiny gap, this void that kind of fits right in between. The way True False operates, you know, it's not about this either or of this is truth or this is fiction. It's just about this kind of strange gray area of you know, and that's where we wanted to concentrate on in the bumpers. When it comes to magic, the one image that really resonated with all of us was the image you see here, which is the history of the orange tree by the great Robert Houdin. And I don't know if, I'm sure you did some history on that and some research on that, I'll let you elaborate. But, you know, that trick for me was a great jumping off point, because what appears to be magic, this magician evoking this tree to actually grow real oranges, what you find out is Houdin was not a magician. He was a clockmaker first. He was an inventor. It was only later that he decided to take those skills and kind of harness the power of magic. When he created the orange tree, which took him so many years, decades, I mean, it's one of the most famous tricks ever made, it actually is, when you open it up inside, this incredible clock. It's gears that, it's so sophisticated that actually create the illusion that this tree is growing oranges in front of you. And so what we were after was trying to find that kind of magic, that it's grounded in both the mechanics, the mechanisms, the reality, the gears, and nature. and magic. So it's not, so that was really important for us. And especially when we had those conversations about the bumpers, it was about trying to have these really kind of grounded conversations. These are real people, and we didn't want to go talking about mind reading or and levitation. It's talked about kind of sarcastically, and I think that kind of just reinforces the theme.
I'm glad you set me up for my question to Akiko, which was, can you talk about the orange tree image or the orange tree trick and sort of how you thought about representing that or using that?
Well, I mean, I think, kind of what you mentioned, it fell along this great theme of something mechanical, but still bringing something natural from it. And I guess how that relates to a theme for filmmaking or even movie poster making, it's just, there's all these weird, intricate gears behind it, and the magic is trying to make something beautiful in the end that kind of doesn't let on to all the craziness that eventually, got to where you were. So, but yeah, I think for me, relating this to my everyday work, it's just trying to mix art with commerce, trying to mix marketing with coming up with a magical, beautiful image or something that you wouldn't think is necessarily predictable as an image, but still kind of works with the theme. So it's just kind of, trying to pull sleight of hand here and there to do something that's unexpected but still makes sense.
I like what you're saying about this sort of sleight of hand or the magic applying to basically kind of creative process, because there is an enormous amount of, sweat and stuff that goes into it, but the end product, unless that sweat is part of your point, you don't necessarily see all the drafts and all the different decisions and all the directions that you didn't go while you're kind of achieving the thing that you wind up with in the end.
Definitely.
We have a question. Hello. Hi.
Yeah, I just want to say you guys nailed it. I mean, seriously, coming in from the outside as a newcomer to True False and being an event producer for a film event back in Colorado, I'm blown away. You guys did an amazing job at capturing what I think the directors were after. And I'm just curious how that process was for you as an artist, and maybe one, how you are connected to True False or were in the past, or with David and Paul or the team here, and also how, when, as a director of a festival, when you have a vision for something and you're wanting to work with an artist because you're not the artist, but you have a vision for it, how can we as directors best work with you as artists to help convey that while not making it incredibly frustrating for you as being just let me do my thing? So I'm just curious what your process was for True False.
That's a great question, thank you. Let's have sort of Akiko and Jarred, not to kind of polarize these two teams, but it's sort of they're different kind of efforts and different sort of engagements. You guys competed to get spots to do public art, and you guys were hired by Paul and David, yes? So why don't you guys start with that, and then we'll turn it over to Taylor.
Well, I pitched a really wacky idea first to David, and I'm going to spare you the idea because it's so ridiculous now that I think about it.
I kind of want to hear it.
It involved a song by Heart. I'll just leave it at that.
No, which one? Was it Magic Man?
Ding. Yes, and it was immediately, within 30 seconds, and Paul and David are very busy. I mean, it was within 30 seconds. It's are you kidding? This is a joke. This is a joke, right? I was yeah, of course this is a joke. Can't wait to start pitching you the ideas. Just give me a day. But, this is a really good question because, True False is a brand. And it's important that you can't go too far away from that brand. And, now in its 11th year, there's a philosophy behind that brand that whatever we were creating or bringing to the table, and especially with the bumpers, we couldn't go too far away from that. For example, irony is kind of a no-no. And anything too cynical was a no-no. Anything too ridiculous, it had to have a kind of true-false spirit in there. And for me, with the bumpers, there is a responsibility because at the end, if you notice, there's 3 pages of sponsors. So when HBO and Vimeo and et cetera, we have to kind of get approval before these things go live. You know, there's certainly a kind of contract between us and them because they're not going to back something that's too far away from their brand. And I wasn't getting too much hands-on feedback from HBO, but from David and Paul, you know, I will just say that it was highly curated. There's a curatorial spirit that, from the very beginning, you know, I didn't have directing notes. There wasn't a way of like, okay, when you have these conversations, this is how, you know, you need to have them. But, you know, it's important for me to constantly kind of think, okay, this is a festival, this is a brand, this is something that's been building for 10 years. Can't make something too out of whack because, you know, the audience here is expecting something.
Right. Well, and that's a difficult line to ride, as this question brings up, because when you wind up trying to make art by committee, it's usually not that great. So you're having to kind of listen to all these different voices and yet come up with something that is imaginative and is good and isn't watered down in any way. And I'm sure Akiko
the most
the same
important thing I've learned with Paul and David is, if you believe in an idea, you have to really stand by that. You have to believe in that idea because, you know, they'll tell you themselves, and the entire True False team, I don't want to say it's this beautiful contradiction where it's this open source philosophy of pitch me ideas, anything, you know, if it's these floating cities up in the galaxies.
Or Heart's Magic Man.
or not Heart's Magic Man. But at the same time, those ideas are going to be highly scrutinized. And I was on some of those emails with you. They're intense. I mean, this festival is successful because you have to be able to stand by your ideas. You're going to have a lot of opinions. You're going to have a lot of things decided by committee. And for me, that was the best part of this process because when I did really believe in something, and there was a couple spots where I had to really stand my ground, I felt they wound up being much stronger because they kind of put you to the test. And it was hard, but I think, you know, the next time I do this, and I would love to do this again for True False or for another festival, you know, I've learned that, you know, when you pitch ideas, they have to be smart, they have to be concise, and you have to get ready for like thousands of emails of just, you know, committee feedback. It's like, who, and you know, the people on this list, I'm like, who are these people? What do you mean you didn't like the font? Like, font. Font is very important to True False. I let them have the font. I don't know anything about font, but font was like serious 2 weeks of discussion about the font. And all it is just like a lower third.
I'm going to turn the font question over to Akiko because what you're saying follows up on something that you told me earlier about needing parameters. Because when you just, you know, when someone's like, go make something, it's kind of hard to come up with what you're going to do. And the more limitations you have, it's often easier to do your job.
It is if the people in charge
yeah.
have good taste. But yeah, I really lucked out with making this poster. We're working with Paul and David. They were actually, it was such a smooth process. Sorry. I was really relieved with all their comments. I completely agreed with. And maybe I'm just so used to movie studios beating the living shit out of me, but they had, I think it's, going back to your question of how a filmmaker can make things easier when working with an artist, I think when people really look at your work and understand your point of view, that makes it so much easier. When someone comes to you and think that you're just a monkey for hire and they want you to make this because you do movie posters, not understanding why you make movie posters and what you do, what you believe in as far as, you know, doing something visually, it's very difficult. So when these aesthetics meet up, that just makes everything exponentially easier. So my recommendation for anybody looking for a poster is to just really look at the designer and look what common themes tend to pop up in their work. And if it doesn't feel like it's going to work for your film, look for somebody else. It'll be easier on your side too. So it just makes it a much gentler process. And you know, like I said, I'm so appreciative to be able to do this poster and have it go the way it did because it was just really a pleasant experience.
So for both of you, it's a completely different thing. You are proposing an idea, competing for a spot to do public art. Like, I think that I know from Camellia that this year the public art competition was more intense than ever. There were more artists applying and wanting to be part of the festival, which is great. And so when you kind of look at something like this, I mean, how do you approach an idea like this? Like, where do you come from in terms of thinking about pitching an idea that you're wanting to get accepted? How did you kind of come into this process?
I actually it sort of ended up being a hybrid of these two things, because I was called in to talk about potential projects that were mechanical, because someone here who'd been involved in the festival for the last many years saw something that I had made through another friend, and they had just been talking about this awesome tree. And so they were David and Paul were wanting to build a mechanical tree, like a blooming tree. And so my friend got in touch with me and was like, you make these gears, like, we're doing this thing. And that was nice, because it was sort of an in to start a conversation versus starting with a blank slate.
Right.
And then we got to get together, and this will maybe address part of the like matching up art getting the art to work with the festival. And I was just having a conversation with Camellia, who's in charge of the art. I was most involved with her, and we were talking about that very thing. And basically, when we met, it was like, hey, I love gears, and I would love to build more gear-type things. I'm totally open to building this tree with you guys, with some other people, and I have these other ideas of something that I could build. And so, like, I tried to stick by that and just kind of, like, feel it out, because I do think it's important for people to feel ownership, or, like, the person who's designing something, for it to be something that they're all in with.
Which is what Jarred was saying.
Yeah, and it was more just like hey, do our styles match up? Like, here's what I would want to do. Does this seem like it would fit your theme the way that you want it to? Or is this potentially like a take on your theme that you hadn't thought of but that you like? And so that's kind of where we started. And so they were very generous with like being really open to a different proposal in the same vein, and just like letting the artist drive the aesthetic of that. And I think what you were saying about just like matching up the artist and their particular aesthetic, looking at what they've done and what they're proposing, and that style, I think that makes it so much easier, because then you're not, going head to head about every little detail. It was really nice to work with.
It's almost nicer to think about having your fox, especially with the story you're telling, and think about the fox as sort of like a magical animal, or animals in general kind of having magical properties, not necessarily connected with magic tricks, although there is the rabbit. I'm trying to think of other animals that are in magic tricks. But to kind of, as a complement to the orange tree, rather than kind of replicating that, since that exists here, then you have this other idea of kind of the mechanism and like pulling back the curtain, like there's how it's working.
I felt really lucky to get to do something that came from me.
Yeah, but still fit.
That still fit, and I think that it's kind of like if you go on a date with someone and you're like, you seem really cool. Does this work? Because we could try and make it work, but it's not going to work. Like, either it feels like it's going to work or it's not going to work. It's kind of the same thing. And you can do it. You can spend 5 years in that, but it's not going to work.
Do you want to talk about your dating experience with the festival?
My proposal process is actually really smooth. Like I said, I was already kind of thinking about this project and how I was going to create this kind of environment where there was some sort of alien invasion, and I came across the True False. I did True False last year with the Spore Collaborative Project. We did the Migratory Hive, which was on the Picture House lawn last year. So I had a little bit of experience at True False Festival. I had an amazing time here last year, and I was like, yeah, I'll pitch for that festival again. And
Like, I'll go on another date with them.
Yeah, exactly. And after about 60 emails between Camille and me, I finally got it accepted. Although almost nothing changed throughout those 60 emails of correspondence back and forth before getting it accepted. Like, the thing I pitched is the thing that is out there now.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So I was lucky enough that I didn't really have to butt heads. Our visions were fairly together on that.
Cool.
Yeah, it was nice to like have an idea and want to create something and have someone be able to like be like, yeah, I will support that project. I think that's great, and we can have it here and here.
Please.
I do feel like that's a testament to Camellia and the way that she works.
Here.
I don't know that she's here, but she's really awesome, and it is like so nice and essential to be working with someone who is able to toe the line between like pleasing everyone else that they're working with and making sure that stuff gets done. Also, just what we said we would do that we do, like being a guide and kind of like managing people, but also just holding a space for that person to do what they're doing is a really hard job, I think. And it sounds like, I mean, my experience was that, you know, she really is doing that awesomely and like nourishes and encourages projects and like, but also checks in a lot and is like, how is it going? You want to send me a photo of it? I'm sure it looks great, but will you send me a photo of it so I can just see that it's real? So yeah, I think that having the right person to hold the space and interact with that openness, but also be the like list of email people on the side is
Do you guys have any questions? Just want to encourage people to just step up to the mic if you have questions. Yeah. I want to say I think that your dating metaphor is pretty on the money in terms of thinking about collaboration. No, for real, because it's really difficult to work with someone, and sometimes like that tension and that resistance can wind up producing something really terrific, and other times not so much. Do you have any other sort of experiences that you would want to talk about in terms of the idea of collaboration? Because there is, if we want to kind of go with the magic, there is that, more romance, that magic that happens when you have chemistry with someone or with an idea, and it's not always there. What do you do when you don't encounter that, or how do you kind of work with that? I'm looking at Jarred because I'm thinking about working with clients.
What do you do?
What do I do? Yeah, well, kind of like how do you sort of work through that? I mean, I guess just sort of questioning about like
martinis.
Right. More romance,
Really
candlelight, roses.
I think that's when you're glad that you correspond through email. Gives you time to re-edit your emails. Yeah, because I mean, one experience is I worked with a Spanish director, and he had a beautiful film, but he was just a nightmare to work with. And I was trying to be as nice as possible and as respectful as possible, but sometimes it's just, you're just hoping for it to finish as soon as possibly, but still try to come out at the end with a good product and a good piece of art. And yeah, I think that's when I'm really thankful that email is around.
I had the fortune of working with a local production company here. They're called Chimeric. And that was difficult for me because I'm also a cinematographer and I'm very hands-on. And
where are you located usually?
In New York.
Yeah.
So some of the earlier conversations just on the production side was, okay, I'll bring out my crew. I'll bring out the camera package. I'll shoot this and direct this. But it was important for David to work with Chimeric, who I think they've also worked with them in the past. And that's difficult because you're meeting people for the first time. And I met them a day before we shot. And when I work with a cinematographer, an editor, a producer, I really need to have a relationship with these people. And they need to kind of understand my instinct. They don't, you know, so I was very nervous arriving because I kept thinking, okay, well, this is going to be terrible. You know, how do you balance being direct with someone without them hurting their feelings? You know, when you're on set, it's all about that clock. You've got 12 hours to light. You've got 4 interviews. It all comes down to, all right, now you got to have this magical conversation in 90 minutes. But at the same time, you can't be abusive to this crew you just met. And that was a real learning experience for me because I took a step back and I let them do their thing. I understood what was important for me, which was really these conversations, because I knew like all these themes were going to come out of me connecting with these people. And the technical part of it, even though, so I came up and I had storyboards and I had references, I had to kind of let go. And I'm glad I did, because this production company, they're amazing to work with. And I don't know, I'm trailing, but for me, I think it's important with the theme of collaboration. It's important to actually to work with people you don't always work with. I think what happens is, things tend to get kind of stale over a period of time, especially if you're working in commercials. You just keep cranking out the same thing. It's really exciting to work with new people, and so that's my story.
Well, but no, this is a great point about the idea, and it leads to it follows up on what Akiko was saying about collaboration or parameters, that you can have parameters and limitations, and it's also nice to have someone to bump up against, or new people or new ideas to confront, to kind of push the project ahead. Taylor, I know that you collaborated with someone to build the Fox. Do you want to talk about that? Is that someone you've worked with before, or how did that happen?
That was a blind date.
Nice.
This wonderful, brilliant local fellow man named Dan Goldstein, who has an engineering background. Camelia put us in touch. She thought that it would be cool for me to have someone here that I was working with, because I had talked about being able to come and work here for a month or two on the project. I'm based in Colorado and Iowa, in those two places. So I was excited about maybe getting to work with people here on parts of it. And a lot of what I've learned in the last many years has just been, has been from books. There are some really awesome books on old clocks and mechanisms. 507 Mechanical Motions is my favorite. It's like written in the 1800s, incredible little diagrams and then tiny histories of what those things were used for. But learning from books, but mostly learning the skills, beginning to learn the skills that I need for a particular project from a person that's in the area that I'm living. And particularly a lot of people in my hometown, just like really amazing, intricate, strange people that come out of the woodwork. And I really am able to learn well that way with someone who's mentoring me, or I'll tell them what I'm trying to do. Like, I want to make this thing move this way. I watched this thing on YouTube. I don't really get it. I read this book. And then they share their advice. So it's like, I mean, for me, it feels like the best thing, because you're not in that void and you have someone else, and they have different skills, but they're not they don't need to spend all of their time on your project. But you can go to them for help and guidance, and hopefully it doesn't drain them. Hopefully it inspires them, or if nothing else, like doesn't take anything away from them. And you can go to them and then go work for hours and hours and hours on that, and then go back and check in. And I've really appreciated those relationships, and I was excited to work with someone who had a totally different skill set than me. And so Dan's an engineer, and so it's like we got to like communicate a lot about design, and he helped me develop some more complex ideas about things that we could do. And then I suggested that he look into this like wooden gear chain that could be built, and he got really excited about building it with his CNC router, which is computer controlled router. And I'm like kind of a Luddite and sort of stay away from that stuff and like cut gears on a bandsaw, and they work great. They were great. So we got to combine forces, which I think is really fun, and it was really awesome to get to work with someone from this area and learn a lot from him, but also be able to work on a project that came from my vision and work on that together. So it was really lucky, and we both put a lot of time into it, and just sort of the brain exercises of like rearranging things spatially and just constantly figuring out how things fit together was really a unique and awesome experience.
Now, the music that plays, well, first of all, how often is the music going to? When can we hear the music? Did we?
Yeah,
I know it was this morning.
So there was a musical performance with the Fox,
Right.
and that was. We'll be kicking off Busker's Last Stand with one section of that.
Okay.
But that was the only time that is getting played. But there's a music component to the sculpture, and those are kind of were meant to interact a little bit. It was like the human-machine relationship.
Right.
But the music within the sculpture is still getting tweaked. We had some stuff we're still working on, like tuning the dulcimer and figuring out. But I can tell you like the concept behind it, which is exciting. I'm not sure if that's.
No, yeah, go ahead.
It was really fun to design because a friend of mine in Colorado actually composed a piece on the piano, which is essentially what we've built is a piano that gets played by spinning gears. I call it a dulcimer, but it's not a dulcimer. It's like a hammered dulcimer, but it's much more simple, and it only has the notes that are played in a song, but you can rearrange where those notes get hit and the timing of those notes. So it is very flexible, and the fun part about it was that we figured out how to build 2 different barrels that house these the little dowels that hit the mechanism, that hit the string, and each barrel they're on the same shaft, but they have different drive gears, different sized drive gears, which means they turn at slightly different speeds, but they hit at the same time on the one every time because they're in different time signatures. And so one is in 9/8 and one is in 4/4 or has 8 beats, and the other one has 9 beats. And so if they start on the 1, when the 8 has gotten to its 8th beat, the 9 still has 1 more beat to go. So the 8 actually starts on the last note of the other melody. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was really fun because what you can do with that is you have 2 very simple melodies, and they combine to actually create a changing melody for 10 measures. So instead of just having like ba-na-na-na-na, ba-na-na-na-na, you've got that going, and then you have another thing that's like ba-na-na-na-na, and then the notes change their relationship to each other every time around because it's like ratcheting like this until they reset again. And so figuring out how to do that with gears and the size of those gears and how fast they spin was really fun. And once you start like getting under the surface of the details of those things, it always becomes so clear to me how little I actually understood about it, and also like spatial things, like transferring information from music or something in the brain to a physical object. To me, and this is part of where all of this project came from, is like an incredible learning experience to be able to move it into your hands and spin something. That's how I learn a lot better than reading something or hearing something, is actually making something. And I would love in the future, and part of what was exciting about what was pushing this project was being able to use that excitement that I have for those things and building those things and making sounds and beats to teach math and music and math's relationship to music, but also just engineering. And so I learned a lot in that collaboration about that, and just having another brain was awesome.
You work with other brains all the time, right? With Spore, I'm saying that's the name of your group, right?
Spore is a project that I work with sometimes.
Yeah. Can you talk because you collaborate?
Yeah, I do
frequently.
Collaborate quite a bit, and it's with I collaborate with a lot of different groups, so I get like a lot of different flavors out of it.
Yeah.
The group out in Arcata is the one I always go to Burning Man with. They always do a different thing each year. This year, they're doing something similar to the Spore project this year. They're building a dome, and inside the triangles of it, they're going to have all these different percussive instruments that you can like play throughout the dome, and it's like they're making a pathway in the dome with these different instruments, so it's like a different set of melodies.
How big is this dome?
I believe 17 feet.
Okay.
So you're gonna have to actually like climb on it to play some of these things. I'm unsure if I'm gonna go out to Burning Man this year and help them with that. But also for Arctica, I worked with Zach Zimmerman, who also assisted me on this project. So I also work with a lot of different scales of groups. The Spore project last year was 12 people, which was hats off to Emily Haymeyer for being able to coordinate that.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, it's more people than I like to work with. I think 2 to 3 is kind of what I've been most comfortable with, or at least like a core group of like 2 to 3. Because then you can actually have, at least in my opinion, you can have like a very deep conversation about it, but it keeps everyone on track after like someone's going too far into like one idea, and there's enough like minds to be like, no, that's a little bit too far in that direction. Let's keep it back on track.
Let's not do heart magic, man.
Yeah.
Oh, you're never gonna get away from that.
Sorry, I'm so glad you
I'm
told
gonna do
us
that spot one day.
You should. Anyway, go ahead. So
Yeah, and
kind of other people to rein it in.
yeah, and lately I've been working with Zach Zimmerman a lot because we balance each other out. He's very meticulous, and I'm very utilitarian. I'm like, if it works, it works. So he's like a very good balance to me because I can also pull him back and like, all right, you're paying way too much attention on that little square inch of project. Like, we have a bigger thing to do. And as far as working with collaborators that you don't necessarily agree with, I've also had to do that for a couple projects where it's just like, after a while, you just have to like step back and like, all right, I'm gonna finish this project, I'm gonna be a little frustrated, and I will decide next project whether I'm gonna work with this group or work with a different group. But I think for me, kind of getting all the different flavors, working with as many sets of people as I can really works for me because I like to think about different things at a different time, you know? I like having a lot of flavors in my life.
Right. Well, if you said you came from an architecture background,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that is so collaborative anyway, but then there's this moment when the architect or a designer will go and sort of work alone or think alone. So how does your collaborative work then fuel what you do when you work independently or work solo?
So really how that process works for me is I do most of my work locked in a room with Netflix going on a show that I've already watched that I'm not paying attention to, and then I write a lot or I draw a lot and just have that in the background to distract my brain, and then come back to the group and kind of like talk about what our ideas were, and then
Are they off doing the same thing?
Yeah, they're usually off doing the same thing, and then we spend like 5 hours talking about it, and then go back to the design process after that arrangement. So it's most of the actual hard work, most of the creative process is alone for me. That's just the best way I think. And then you come back and you kind of like flesh it out, and then you hit off of other people's ideas, and you're like, oh wow, that's really interesting. What if we take it that way? And so you kind of like find the direction in the group, and then go back to the creative process individually. Is my personal process.
Any questions? I want to open this up to questions from the audience, so please bring it.
I'm just curious, when did the process start for you guys prior to the festival, and how long did you spend, like, in the process we just talked about before the final pieces were done?
Who wants to?
I think around mid-September, David gave me a call and just kind of planted the seed to ask me if I wanted to do this, and it was actually this really weirdly cryptic conversation. We were talking for about 30 minutes, and then I was like, all right, well, I gotta go. It's great talking with you. He's like, okay, great. Just by the way, I'd love for you to direct the 4 bumpers this year. I was like, Jesus, man, why didn't you tell me that first? Just testing me. So that happened around September. We started talking about some pre-pro. Like I said, this escape artist literally did disappear. So we had to regroup, and we filmed over, I came back to Columbia in December and was here for about 5 days, but we pre-lit one day and we shot another day. And then I was lucky because the Christmas holidays came up and I didn't have anything going on, and I just kind of locked myself in a room, and I was able to kind of bang all these out in an intense 5 days in a row.
So, but you had to do a lot of research beforehand. Did you, in terms of finding the, and also want to point out that it's great how much connection all of you have with Columbia. Well, you've worked for True False before, Akiko.
This is my first time.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah? For some reason I was thinking, so this is your first time, and this is your first time.
No.
No, it's not your first time.
I made a film with Paul last year about the
Okay.
Regency Hotel, and then the reason well, the new Broadway. That's not
Yes, the new double
sure
tree
everyone
Broadway.
loves.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember the Regency Hotel. And then before that, I had an art project going on. I was here just as an artist with a video installation on the front wall of the Regency.
Oh, right. And then you were here. You've been here before, and then you were brought in, but working with local materials. And anyway, so time-wise, research back to the but the research. How did you find your magicians? Because that must have taken.
No, it took 3 days, 2 or 3 days. It was because of this guy who really screwed us, which is great. The magic store. So Arrow, who runs Gotcha, David went in and said, all right, this is what I got going on. We're trying to wrangle 4 local amateur magicians that may not be full-time magicians. They have real careers, but they also do magic. So we knew that Arrow would be one of them. And Arrow said, well, I could bring my daughter. And we were like, yes, that's going to be great. And then he's like, yeah, I know this guy, Steve Ferris. He's like probably one of the best sleight-of-hand guys in town. We should bring him on for our skill guy. So that was 2. And then I know that Mr. Oxenhandler and his son are really involved with the festival, and we knew that. I don't know how did David approach you, or how did we find out?
I got an email.
It's that simple.
Said, would you be interested in doing this? And I talked to my son, who's a lawyer. I'm a circuit judge, and so there's some ethical issues with me being involved in any kind of advertising for anything. And so I said, I'm interested in doing this. However, I've got to run it by our ethics commission. And we contacted the ethics commission in light of the fact that really my name wasn't really being put out there. There was no money involved. It's a not-for-profit. It had all the right check marks next to it. And they gave me their blessing. And then that really was it. I said, yes, I'm excited. And David knew that I would be anxious about having anyone just talking to me really on the record. If a newspaper person calls up and says, I want to talk with you and I have to record this, I go, I'm sorry, I don't do that. You can come in and talk with me. And so he had great confidence in you. And really, I showed up one afternoon, dressed as I thought I would be dressed. And that was it. And you know, I was thinking that just as everyone else had this little project that they were, not a little project, but the project they were working on, that's what you did to me. Because the bit that showed up in the bumper, really, you pulled me into that. I was just talking, and I became so relaxed in what I was talking about and so comfortable that suddenly I was doing things with my hands, and I didn't know what would end up on the screen, obviously, and when I saw it, it took my breath away, just as I believe that everybody's art here has taken everybody's breath away. And it startled me how it came up, and it was a heck of an experience. And as I was telling Jarred just a little while ago, I was sentencing a defendant in a case, and I got done, and he turned to me and he said, hey, I really like your advertisement.
Oh my.
And I said, well, you should have told me that ahead of time. I didn't say that.
Sorry, I'm laughing into the microphone.
It's incredible.
I'm getting the signal that we are about out of time. We might have one more question, or this is a great note to end. One more question? Are you pointing to? Oh, if anyone has one more question, to step up to the mic. Or we can wrap up with this fantastic comment from you, which is about the great job that these 4 artists did in sort of fulfilling the theme of the show. And I'm so grateful to have been part of this conversation with you about the actual kind of magic that you brought to the process of creating this and collaborating with other people, which is a kind of a magical process.
It is.
So, any other last questions, comments?
When they remake True Romance, Gary will be playing Christopher Walken's role. Because the irony and the cosmic joke of having a circuit court judge talk about the art of lying and misdirection is the best accomplishment in my life. And this man knows Sicilian tells like no one else.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you.